Another breath, now becoming a page in the Jesus diary, my diary. The day began with the same sun, but the air felt heavier, as if even the wind knew what was coming. The sky held its breath. The earth seemed quieter, almost reverent, and inside me, a silence was growing. Not the silence of peace, but the kind that forms when love prepares itself to be broken. I had been walking toward this day all my life. Every step, every healing, every word spoken beneath the stars was leading me here. And still, nothing could prepare my heart for what it would feel. They saw me as the Lamb, the teacher, the King. But none of those titles protected me from the pain that only love can cause. Pain not from violence, but from voices I knew, from people I loved. Pain that comes not when the nails go through the flesh, but when whispers betray the soul. That morning, someone leaned close enough to break me. And they didn't need to shout. They didn't need to strike. All they did was whisper something only I could hear. And that whisper, soft, almost gentle, shook me more than the soldiers ever could. Before the crowd screamed, before the cross cast its shadow, I had already begun to break. Because pain doesn't wait for blood. It begins in the places no one sees. It begins in the quiet. And that's where this story begins. In the whisper before the wound. In a love that held me long before the world did. If something inside you trembles too, if you've ever felt wounded not by the world but by those closest to your heart, leave your like as a quiet act of faith. As if to say, yes, I felt this too, and I'm still here. The air was thick with dust and anticipation. The kind of stillness that feels louder than chaos. It was early, but the city was already awake. Jerusalem breathing heavily through narrow alleys and crowded courtyards. The smell of smoke and bread, sweat and fear, lingered like incense in a temple too full. The footsteps of Roman soldiers echoed in uneven rhythm, and the marketplace buzzed with whispers, some curious, some cruel. I walked slowly, not because my legs were tired, but because my heart was listening to the silence beneath the noise. The people were all around me, close enough to brush against my robe, but far enough to not see what was happening within me. Some looked with reverence, others with resentment. Most didn't look at all. Just another man walking towards something they couldn't understand. I felt the heat of the sun pressing down, but it was the weight of eyes, watching, waiting, that warmed my skin more than any flame. And yet, it wasn't their stares that unsettled me. It was the absence. The ones who should have stood closer, now blending with the crowd. A breeze passed, lifting a corner of my garment, and for a moment I closed my eyes. I wasn't escaping, I was remembering the laughter, the dinners, the prayers we had shared, the moments where hearts had opened and hope had felt like a living flame. Now, many of those same hearts were silent, some unsure, some ashamed, some simply gone. Inside me, a storm gathered, not of rage, but of sorrow. A sorrow too deep for words, a love too wide to contain. And though my feet moved forward, each step felt like walking through a memory that refused to stay buried. I could feel it approaching, the moment where pain would speak louder than faith. But I didn't run. I stayed in that stillness, because even in silence, I still loved. He stood just beyond the gate, not a soldier, not a priest, just a man whose name few would remember, but whose voice still echoes in my heart. He wasn't shouting like the others. He wasn't hiding like those who loved me, but feared the crowd. He was still, too still, as if the world had stopped moving inside him. And as I passed, something in his eyes called to me, not with hatred, not with reverence, but with something that looked like heartbreak. Not his own, mine. He leaned closer as I drew near, his mouth barely moving. The noise around us grew louder, chants building, footsteps pounding, but his whisper pierced through it all. For words, that was all. You don't deserve this. A stranger, a whisper, but it shattered something in me, because it wasn't the truth that broke me. It was the weight of someone finally seeing it. He didn't know me, not really. He hadn't walked with me on water or seen blind eyes open. He hadn't heard the parables or felt the power when I touched the leper. But he saw me, in my silence, in my surrender, And in that moment, I saw him too. Not just a man, but a mirror. A mirror of every soul who would ever wonder if I was suffering because I was guilty, and every heart that would ache knowing I wasn't. The soldiers tugged at my arm, but I turned my head to look back just once. He was gone, swallowed by the crowd, lost in history. But his words stayed. They pressed into my chest like a nail, not of iron, but of recognition. You don't deserve this. And in those words, a quiet war began inside me, because I knew I could stop all of it. I had the power. The angels stood ready. The heavens held their breath. But I also knew love doesn't escape pain just because it can. Love chooses it when it must. And this was that moment. So I carried those words, his whisper, like a seed buried in my ribs. And as I walked forward toward the nails, I knew this wasn't just about prophecy. It was about being seen and still choosing to stay. I kept walking, each step pressing deeper into the earth, as if gravity had grown heavier just for me. The noise behind me was a blur, shouts turning into jeers, faces into shadows. But inside, I wasn't thinking of the crowd. I wasn't even thinking of the pain that was coming. I was thinking of that voice. You don't deserve this. His words had cracked something open, and what poured out wasn't doubt. It was sorrow, a deep, aching sorrow not for me, but for them. For those who would never say it, for those who would never see it. The closer I got to the place of nails, the more I realized the cross was never going to be the sharpest pain. The betrayal didn't break me. The whip didn't silence me. What pierced me first was being misunderstood. To give everything and be met with suspicion. To offer healing and be accused. To love and be hated for it. But then a moment of stillness. Just before the hill. The crowd pressed forward, but my heart paused. I looked to the sky, not in protest, not in plea, but in quiet surrender. I still choose this, I whispered inside. Not because they see me, but because someday they will. That was the real crucifixion. Not the nails, not the wood, but the choice to love in silence. To remain faithful when no one's watching. To walk toward pain, not for glory, but for redemption. And if you've ever chosen to love someone who didn't see your heart, if you've ever stayed when you could have left, then you already know this pain. You already carry part of this cross. If this page of my diary found you, if it touched a place too tender to speak out loud, then subscribe. Not just to follow a story, but to walk this road with me. Some pages hurt, some heal, but all of them were written with you in mind. That day, I learned that not all pain comes from wounds. Some pain comes from love, the kind that gives without being received, the kind that reaches without being held. When he whispered those words, "You don't deserve this," it wasn't rebellion in his voice. It was heartbreak. It was a desperate attempt to understand a sacrifice too deep for human logic. And in that moment, I saw what few had ever shown me. Not rejection, but sorrow for what love costs. And something shifted inside me. I had always known the cross was coming. Known it since the beginning, since before the world was spoken into motion. But standing there, hearing those trembling words behind me, I realized something deeper. This wasn't just about death. It was about choice. Not once, but again and again. Choosing to love even when unseen. Choosing to forgive even when it would be misunderstood. Choosing to stay when walking away would have been easier. And that's what love truly is. Not the grand gesture, not the miracle, but the whisper in the dark that says, "I'm still here." I saw the kind of love in the voice that trembled behind me, in the voice that didn't understand but still stood nearby. And I realized, faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it's hidden in tears. Sometimes it sounds like confusion. But if it stays, it's real. That day, I didn't just carry the cross. I carried every unspoken pain of those who try to love deeply in a world that doesn't always notice. Every soul that whispers behind someone else's suffering, "You don't deserve this," yet doesn't know how to stop it. Every heart that stays near, even when they don't have the words. And I want you to remember this. Heaven hears even the whispers, the ones no one else sees. The ones that come from love too broken to be eloquent. That kind of love, it's the kind that breaks me and saves the world. I walked away from that moment not heavier, but more open. The weight of the cross was still ahead, the thorns still untouched, the crowd still silent in their rising judgment. But that whisper echoed louder than any shout. It reminded me that even the smallest voice can carry eternity within it. I didn't need thunder. I didn't need angels. That broken voice, uncertain, trembling, was enough to remind me why I stayed. Sometimes we imagine strength as silence, endurance as absence of tears. But I found that the strongest love is the one that breaks first and still remains. That whisper was not rebellion. It was reverence. And in it, I heard something deeper than understanding. I heard presence. I heard someone who didn't know how to carry my pain, but still chose to stand near it. So I ask you, have you ever stayed near someone's pain, even when you couldn't fix it? Have you ever whispered prayers you weren't sure heaven would answer? Then you know the kind of love I'm speaking of. The love that trembles, that fears but doesn't leave. The love that says, I can't take it away, but I won't let you carry it alone. That day, before the nails touched me, I was already pierced by a whisper that held more courage than swords. A love that didn't shout. A love that simply remained. I didn't say anything in return. I couldn't. I just let that moment become part of me. A quiet vow between hearts, sealed not with answers, but with presence. I said nothing. I just let that moment become word. In my Jesus diary, now I leave you with this. Have you ever whispered something that mattered more than anyone knew? Or stayed when your heart was breaking too? Tell me, what did your silence say? If this whisper echoed inside your heart too, don't let it stay silent. Let it move you. Let it remind you that presence is sometimes the greatest miracle. If this page of Jesus' diary touched something sacred in you, share it with someone who may be holding pain in quiet places. Someone who stays even when it hurts. And as the next video appears on your screen, maybe it's not just a video. Maybe it's a response your soul didn't know it was waiting for. Watch it. Let heaven speak in silence again.